Trump leans forward, cuts Obama off mid-sentence. The room gasps. The debate hall, once buzzing with anticipation, is suddenly swallowed by an uneasy silence. Camera lenses tighten their focus, capturing the sharp tilt of Trump's chin and the irritated flicker in his eyes as he barrels over Obama's measured words. His voice, louder than necessary, aims not just at the opponent standing across from him, but at every American watching at home. The stage is bathed in bright, unforgiving light. Rows of audience members shift in their seats, whispers fluttering like restless wings. Some smirk at Trump's brazenness. Others stare in disbelief. It's a scene America has seen before. The bluster, the interruption, the spectacle of dominance. But tonight feels different. The stakes feel heavier, the tension thicker. Obama pauses, steady. His eyes lock on Trump for a fraction of a second, not with anger, not even with annoyance, but with that unmistakable mix of patience and calculation. It's the expression of a man who has weathered storms bigger than insults, who has learned that silence can speak louder than shouting. And yet, the insult lingers in the air like smoke. Trump smirks, satisfied, convinced he has seized control. He leans back with the air of a conqueror, his interruption echoing in the room as though it had settled something. But the truth is the opposite. His arrogance has only unsettled the ground beneath him. For every word he stole, for every second he tried to dominate, something more powerful was quietly building. The audience doesn't know it yet, but history is about to pivot. This was not the first interruption, far from it. Trump would lunge forward again and again and again, until even the moderators could barely keep order. 6 times he would force his voice over Obama's. 6 times he would stretch the bounds of patience, trying to bend dignity into submission. But what Trump could not see, blinded by his own bravado, was that Obama was waiting for the moment when restraint would become revelation, waiting for the interruption that would no longer be a theft of words, but an opening for truth. Because on the 7th time, when Trump lunged again, Obama delivered a line so precise, so devastating, that the hall itself seemed to stop breathing. And from that instant forward, nothing would be the same. The night was more than a debate. It was a collision of visions for America. On one side stood a man whose career was built on spectacle, interruption, and the belief that volume equals victory. On the other stood a former president, remembered not only for his eloquence, but for his steady hand in moments of crisis. The hall was not just filled with voters and reporters. It was thick with the weight of a country fractured by division, searching for direction, aching for clarity. Every election cycle brings debates, but this one carried an edge sharper than most. The nation had been dragged through storms of rhetoric, policy disputes, and cultural clashes that felt less like disagreements and more like existential battles. Immigration, healthcare, dignity itself. These weren't just topics on a podium, they were the lived realities of millions. For immigrants, for workers, for families caught in the crosswinds of politics, this night wasn't theater. It was a test. Who speaks for us and who merely shouts over us? The cameras caught every beat of sweat, every tightening jawline, every flicker of the eyes. Millions sat at home, clutching phones, already ready to tweet, to post, to argue. The debate wasn't contained to the stage it lived in. Living rooms, in community centers, in late-night diners where screens glowed against dark windows. Each word had the power to affirm or to wound, to spark hope or to deepen despair. Trump understood that chaos could be a weapon. Interrupting wasn't just a habit, it was a strategy. By cutting Obama short, by muscling into his sentences, he wasn't trying to win an argument, he was trying to dominate the atmosphere, to flood the air with noise until dignity drowned. And for a moment, it seemed like it might work. But Obama knew something Trump didn't. The louder the noise, the more people lean in to hear the calm voice cutting through it. The more chaos swirled, the more authority rested in the one who did not flinch. Every interruption that night was a gamble. 6 times Trump rolled the dice, believing the crowd would reward bravado. Yet with each roll, the tension didn't dissipate, it grew. The room's collective breath tightened, waiting, wondering, needing to see when and how Obama would answer. And that anticipation, that hunger for the response, became the heartbeat of the night. Viewers didn't just want to hear policies anymore, they wanted a moment. A moment that would puncture arrogance, that would remind them why words, when wielded with precision, can feel like justice. The country had seen arguments before. They had seen shouting matches and staged takedowns. But this was different. This felt like a duel, not of fists or weapons, but of philosophies. Noise versus composure, bluster versus truth. And deep down, even those skeptical of politics could feel it that something was building, because it wasn't about the first interruption. It wasn't about the second, the third, or even the sixth. It was about the seventh. The one interruption that would not be met with patience alone, but with a line so sharp, so unshakable, that it would reverberate far beyond the stage. And as Trump leaned into his strategy, certain of his advantage, the audience leaned too toward Obama, toward the moment they knew was coming, though they couldn't yet predict its form. Something was about to happen. Something no one in that hall, nor anyone watching across the country, would forget. Donald Trump did not stumble into the art of interruption. He wielded it the way a prizefighter wields a jab, constant, disruptive, designed not to knock an opponent out, but to wear them down, to unnerve, to make them fight on his terms. Long before the cameras of this debate night captured him, leaning forward, slicing through Obama's words, Trump had already built his reputation on the politics of dominance. From the very beginning of his political career, interruption was not a side effect of his style, it was the style itself. In Republican primaries, he bulldozed rivals with quips that were less about substance and more about spectacle. He didn't care if the answer was serious, if the policy was explained. What mattered was control of the room, control of the soundbite, control of the moment. Where others played by the rules of exchange, Trump rewrote the rules. Whoever spoke loudest, longest, and most often won. Audiences remember the nicknames, the smirks, the constant leaning over microphones. It wasn't charisma in the traditional sense. It was theater, a deliberate choice to look like the alpha, the man who refused to yield an inch. Each interruption was a reminder of hierarchy. I speak, you wait. I dominate, you endure. It was less a conversation and more a show of power. Trump's background as a reality television figure only sharpened this instinct. On television, silence is death. Pauses are cut. Momentum is everything. He carried that same philosophy into politics, convinced that the cameras adored his energy, that the public rewarded noise because noise meant life. To him, interruption wasn't rudeness, it was victory. And yet, beneath the bravado, there was fragility. The louder he became, the more fragile he looked. For every booming interjection, there was a flicker of insecurity. The need to dominate revealed the fear of being diminished. The interruptions weren't proof of strength, but of a gnawing anxiety that if he allowed his opponent to finish a thought, the contrast in clarity would expose him. Trump understood this, even if subconsciously. And so he kept the words coming, crashing like waves against the steady cliffs of his opponents. This strategy, though often effective in the short term, carried risks. In debates with other Republican figures, the sheer force of Trump's personality overwhelmed men and women unprepared for the storm. They fumbled, lost composure, played into his chaos. But Obama was not like them. Obama's strength had always been patience under fire, an ability to let the storm rage and still keep his footing. Trump was about to discover that the same tactic that humbled others could backfire when aimed at someone who understood timing better than anyone on that stage. Still, Trump believed interruption was his sharpest weapon. He entered this debate certain that if he could unnerve Obama, force him to abandon his measured cadence, he would win not only the argument, but the spectacle. He believed the audience would mistake noise for authority, arrogance for strength. He leaned forward not to answer, but to erase. He cut in not to illuminate, but to consume. But arrogance carries its own blind spots. Trump mistook the gasps in the audience as awe rather than disapproval. He mistook Obama's silence as weakness rather than strategy. He mistook 6 interruptions as dominance. when in fact they were digging the hole deeper for what was about to come. The contrast could not have been clearer. Trump thrived on disruption, a man who feared the quiet because quiet gave space for truth. Obama thrived on composure, a man who knew that silence was often more powerful than shouting. And so, the louder Trump grew, the more fragile he appeared. The more interruptions he hurled, the more he revealed his desperation to stay in control. It was a strategy designed to rattle, but in this room, on this night, it became a countdown. Each interruption was not a victory, but a step toward the moment when the weapon would backfire. 6 times he swung, 6 times he tried to shatter the rhythm, and each time, Obama absorbed the blow, waiting. Trump thought, interrupt. Barack Obama's power was never found in the volume of his voice. It was in the spaces between words, the pauses, the calm steadiness, the deliberate patience that forced even his critics to lean in and listen. From the earliest days of his career, he was shaped not in arenas of chaos, but in rooms where clarity mattered more than noise. And that history, often underestimated, built the foundation for the composure that would one day be tested under the brightest lights. Long before he stepped onto the national stage, Obama had already learned what it meant to face hostility without flinching. As a young senator from Illinois, he walked into a chamber filled with veteran lawmakers, many skeptical of the newcomer with a strange name and a background that didn't fit the mold. They challenged him, dismissed him, sometimes mocked him behind closed doors. But instead of firing back with anger, Obama studied, listened, and responded with precision. He understood that credibility wasn't seized through interruptions or grandstanding. It was earned by outlasting the storm with unshakable clarity. On the campaign trail, he carried that same discipline. Crowds heckled him, opponents tried to bait him, pundits mocked his calm as weakness, but time and again, he turned what looked like passivity into strength. When rivals raised their voices, Obama kept it steady. When others pointed fingers, he folded his hands and waited. And when the noise died down, when people finally listened, his words carried farther than all the shouting combined. That was his rhythm. Patience first, precision second. He understood the value of waiting, of letting the air thicken with tension before cutting it open with a single line. It was a lesson born not just from politics, but from life itself. As the son of a Kenyan immigrant and a mother who taught him the weight of empathy, he knew what it meant to be underestimated, to be spoken over, to be told he didn't belong. Rather than mirror that hostility, he crafted an identity that turned every dismissal into composure, every insult into timing. His debates as president had already foreshadowed this talent. In 2008, he faced down seasoned opponents who tried to rattle him with experience and age. In 2012, he stood against Romney's sharp barbs, holding steady until the right moment to counter. Each time, his power wasn't in overwhelming force, but in waiting for the perfect opening. He made politics feel less like a brawl and more like a chess match, one where he was always 3 moves ahead. That history mattered, because Trump was not the first man to try and drown Obama out with volume. He had been interrupted before. He had been dismissed before. He had been told, implicitly and explicitly, to know his place. And each time he responded the same way, with patience, with calculation, with words that pierced through the arrogance. This was why audiences trusted him, especially those who knew what it felt like to be silenced or overlooked. Immigrants who had been talked over in boardrooms, families who had been ignored in town halls, communities who had been told their voices didn't matter. When Obama stood on stage, silent in the face of noise, they saw themselves. They saw a man who knew restraint was not weakness, it was discipline. They saw dignity weaponized, not as anger, but as presence. And presence mattered. Against Trump's interruptions, Obama's stillness was its own form of rebuttal. It told the audience, I don't need to match chaos with chaos. I can let him unravel himself. The longer he held his calm, the more people realized the imbalance. One man looked frantic, the other unshaken. One man relied on dominance, the other on clarity. The irony was striking. Trump believed interruptions made him the stronger figure. But in the contrast, they revealed Obama's strength instead. It was like watching two fighters in a ring. One flailing with wild punches, the other waiting, reading, conserving energy until the exact moment for a clean strike. Obama's history had trained him for this. Every Senate skirmish, every campaign ambush, every dismissive headline, they were all rehearsals for this moment. And so, on that debate night, when Trump lunged again and again, Obama's composure was not accidental. It was muscle memory. It was the culmination of years spent turning hostility into opportunity. He had faced down louder men, sharper critics, harsher storms. He had learned that timing mattered more than theatrics. And now, standing in front of the nation, he was prepared to show exactly what that meant. Because the truth was, Trump's interruptions weren't breaking Obama's rhythm. They were fueling it. Each cutoff, each smirk, each attempt to dominate was adding weight to the silence Obama carried. The audience could feel it. Something was building. And Obama could feel it too. His patience wasn't endless, it was purposeful. That's what prepared him for this exact moment. 6 times he had been interrupted. 6 times he had chosen restraint. But restraint wasn't surrender. It was the loading of a spring, the holding of breath before release. And when the 7th interruption came, Obama was ready not to shout, not to flail, but to strike with the kind of line that history remembers. The first interruption came quickly, almost too quickly. Obama had barely begun to lay out a thought on healthcare when Trump lunged forward, his voice crashing into the middle of the sentence. The audience shifted, surprised, but not shocked. This was, after all, a familiar tactic. Obama, however, didn't flinch. He stood steady, lips pressed into a thin line, letting Trump's words echo before resuming exactly where he left off. It was a small act of discipline, but one that signaled, "I will not be thrown off course." The second interruption followed minutes later, this time more aggressive. Trump cut in with a hand gesture, his tone dripping with derision. The crowd stirred, the moderators leaned forward, but Obama simply lifted his chin slightly, allowing Trump to finish before reclaiming the floor. It was a move so subtle that many missed its brilliance. By refusing to fight for airtime, Obama forced the contrast into the open. One man was loud, the other was composed. By the third interruption, the audience was restless. A few groans slipped through the otherwise tense silence. Commentators scribbled notes, exchanging knowing glances. This was becoming a pattern. Trump leaned harder into his strategy, convinced that every cut-off weakened his opponent. But Obama's refusal to bite back made the arrogance more glaring. With every interjection, the audience's patience wore thinner, not with Obama, but with the man trying to silence him. The fourth interruption landed like a drumbeat. This time, Trump's voice practically shouted over Obama's, his words spilling faster, his tone sharper. The moderators tried to step in, but Trump pressed on, unwilling to yield even a second. Obama's eyes flickered calm, but watchful. He took a measured sip of water, then resumed. For the first time, the tension was palpable. Viewers at home tweeted in frustration. Hashtags began forming. Even commentators on the broadcast exchanged uneasy looks. Everyone could feel the imbalance. The fifth interruption came on the heels of a critical point about immigration. Obama's voice, steady and deliberate, was again swallowed by Trump's bluster. This time, the reaction was immediate. The crowd groaned audibly. Someone even muttered loudly enough to be caught by the microphones. The spectacle was no longer amusing. It was disruptive. Obama let the silence linger after Trump's words, allowing the weight of the disrespect to sink in before continuing. He did not need to raise his voice. The room was already making the judgment for him. Then came the sixth interruption. It was sharper, angrier, delivered with the force of a man desperate to dominate. Trump leaned in, gesturing with his hands, his voice nearly barking. The moderators tried again to regain order, their voices drowned in the scuffle of Trump's tone. And here, for the first time, Obama's composure shifted, not broken, but sharpened. He stopped speaking mid-sentence. His eyes narrowed, locking on Trump with a stillness that froze the air. He didn't move, didn't respond, just held the silence. It was not retreat, it was a warning. The crowd reacted instantly. Gasps, murmurs, the sense that something had shifted. This was no longer the back and forth of a typical debate. This was a countdown. The moderators, visibly tense, glanced at one another. Commentators whispered into microphones during the break, their voices edged with anticipation. Social media lit up with exasperation and intrigue. How long could Obama hold his calm? When would he answer back? Trump, convinced he had cornered his opponent, leaned back with that signature smirk. He believed the interruptions had broken through, that Obama's patience was proof of defeat. But the audience sensed otherwise. The pauses were too deliberate. The silences too heavy. It wasn't weakness they were seeing, it was preparation. Because 6 times, Obama had been cut short. 6 times, he had chosen to let Trump's arrogance reveal itself. But the 7th time would be different. And when Trump lunged for his 7th interruption, that's when everything changed. The room was already teetering on the edge of exhaustion. 6 times, Trump had lunged in, slicing through Obama's sentences with the blunt edge of arrogance. 6 times, the moderators had failed to rein him in. 6 times, the audience had groaned, shifted, sighed, as though waiting for a dam to break. And then it happened, the 7th interruption. Obama had just begun to outline a vision for unity, speaking carefully, his cadence measured, when Trump cut across him once more. His voice was louder than before, almost shouting, his hands slicing through the air like blades. He leaned forward. Trump froze. For the first time that night, his smirk faltered. He blinked, opened his mouth, closed it again, searching for a retort that wouldn't come. His strategy, once so dominant, now looked flimsy under the weight of Obama's restraint. It was as if the noise had finally met its counterweight, and it wasn't louder noise, it was dignity. Commentators scrambled, their voices animated with disbelief. "Did you hear that?" one whispered into the mic, as though afraid to break the spell. Social media exploded instantly. Clips of the line were posted within seconds. Captions flooding timelines. The 7th time was the last time. Memes sprang up overnight, Obama's calm stare paired with Trump's stunned silence. But inside the hall, the moment was even more powerful than the replay. Because it wasn't just the words, it was the timing. It was the silence that preceded them, the patience that made the line hit with the force of inevitability. It was the way Obama had waited, endured 6 interruptions, and then chosen the exact second when Trump's arrogance had peaked to deliver the counterblow. The crowd would remember the look on Trump's face, the flush of color in his cheeks, the twitch in his jaw, the sudden loss of rhythm, like a fighter hit squarely for the first time. He tried to lean forward again, to seize back the momentum, but the room wasn't with him anymore. Every attempt at bravado after that line sounded hollow, deflated. The confidence that once carried his voice now betrayed him, exposing the fragility underneath. Obama, meanwhile, didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice or bask in the applause. He simply straightened his shoulders, offered the faintest hint of a smile, and continued. That was the brilliance of it. The line wasn't a grandstanding moment, it was a reminder that leadership isn't about the noise you can generate, but the truth you can carry without flinching. And the truth was clear. Trump had lost control of the room. The moderators, once struggling to maintain order, now looked almost relieved. The audience leaned in closer to Obama. Their trust in him deepened by the demonstration of patience and precision. Commentators later described it as a freeze frame moment, the kind of scene that lives on in political memory long after the transcripts are forgotten. Replay after replay would circulate. News anchors would slow the footage, dissecting the silence before the strike, the exact moment when Trump's expression shifted from defiance to doubt. Columnists would call it the turning point of the night. The instant the energy in the hall pivoted irreversibly. But for those in the room, it felt even simpler. They had watched arrogance unravel in real time. They had seen composure triumph without theatrics. They had witnessed a reminder of why Obama's voice had once carried the weight of the presidency, because he didn't need to shout to be heard. The eruption of applause eventually faded, but the atmosphere never returned to what it had been. Every interruption afterward seemed weaker. Every attempt by Trump to dominate now painted against the memory of that single devastating line. Obama didn't need to remind the audience what had happened. They carried it with them, etched into their own reactions. And so, as the debate carried on, the room itself felt changed. What once seemed like chaos now felt like order restored. Obama spoke, and he was heard. Trump interrupted again, but now the interruptions fell flat, met with eye rolls instead of shock. The power had shifted. What had begun as a tactic to dominate had become the very thing that exposed Trump's vulnerability. The noise had built, wave after wave, until Obama let it crest, and then, with one line, he broke it. Because the truth is, debates are not remembered for every policy detail or every exchange. They are remembered for moments. And this was the moment, the seventh interruption, the line that silenced arrogance, the instant the balance tipped. From that point forward, the debate belonged to Obama. And the country, watching with bated breath, knew they had witnessed something that would echo far beyond that stage. But the story didn't end there. Because what happened inside that hall was only the beginning. Outside its walls, in the digital storm of tweets, memes, and breaking news alerts, the shockwaves of that single line were about to ripple across the nation. The debate had ended, but in truth, it had only just begun. What lingered wasn't the policy exchanges or the moderator's questions, it was the line, the seventh interruption, the silence before it, the calm delivery, and the eruption that followed. Before Obama had even left the stage, America was already replaying it in living rooms, on laptops, on phones, held inches from faces glowing in the dark. Within minutes, hashtags flooded across platforms. The seventh line rocketed to the top of Twitter's trending list, quickly joined by Calm Over Chaos and Obama Owned. Short clips of the moment were uploaded, remixed, slowed down, turned into GIFs that looped endlessly. One showed Trump's smirk fading frame by frame. Another zoomed in on Obama's piercing stare, the caption reading simply, "Patience is power." Memes sprouted like wildfire. A split screen of Trump yelling and Obama's composed face was captioned, "Noise versus voice." Another mocked Trump's constant interruptions with a running tally that stopped abruptly at 7, stamped with Obama's line in bold white letters. TikTok creators layered the audio over dramatic music, treating it like a scene from a blockbuster film. Instagram feeds filled with fan art, Obama painted like a modern-day gladiator who had slain his opponent not with a sword but with a single cutting sentence. Commentators across the political spectrum couldn't look away. CNN ran the clip at the top of every hour, anchors marveling at the precision of the strike. MSNBC's analysts called it the defining moment of the debate, while even some conservative commentators admitted Trump had been caught flat-footed. On YouTube, political channels replayed the scene with dramatic commentary, slow-motion breakdowns, and instant reaction panels. The words, "If you have to talk over me 6 times just to be heard," were quoted so often they began to feel etched into the cultural record. Late-night hosts jumped in with lightning speed. On The Daily Show, the audience roared as the clip played on loop, each time met with laughter and applause. That, the host joked, is what happens when you try to wrestle a professor and end up getting schooled. On Saturday Night Live, writers scrambled to rework the week's cold open around the moment, knowing it was the only joke America wanted to hear that weekend. But beyond celebrities and commentators, it was ordinary Americans who carried the shockwave the furthest. Parents at kitchen tables told their kids to watch the clip, explaining why patience mattered more than shouting. College students shared it across group chats, tagging friends with lines like, "This is how you shut down a bully." Community leaders reposted the video with pride, framing it as a reminder that dignity could still triumph in a noisy, divided era. For immigrant families, for marginalized voices who had so often felt drowned out, Obama's composure carried a resonance deeper than politics. It was validation, proof that silence, timing, and clarity could dismantle arrogance that seemed untouchable. One viral post captured the sentiment perfectly. As someone who's been interrupted my whole life, this moment was everything. Celebrities lent their voices too. Ava DuVernay tweeted the line with 3 fire emojis, calling it cinema. Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote, "Some lines rhyme, some lines sing." And some lines shut the whole room down. Even athletes chimed in. LeBron James posted the clip on Instagram with the caption, "Legendary. Straight legendary." The clip reached millions within hours. By the next morning, it had become unavoidable. News alerts referred to it simply as the 7th line. Newspaper headlines quoted it in bold. Radio hosts replayed it between songs. Even those who hadn't watched the debate live knew exactly what had happened because the moment had transcended the debate itself. Trump, meanwhile, scrambled to spin the fallout. He lashed out on social media, claiming the moderators had been biased, accusing Obama of rehearsed zingers. But the damage was done. The more he tried to explain, the more attention returned to the silence that had unraveled him. His interruptions, once tools of dominance, were now remembered only as the setup to his undoing. Obama, characteristically, didn't boast. He gave a brief interview afterward, deflecting attention from the viral clip and returning to his message about unity in leadership. But his restraint only amplified the contrast. To the public, it reinforced exactly why the moment mattered, because it wasn't about winning an argument with noise, but about restoring a sense of balance with dignity. And so, the shockwaves continued. Teachers used the clip in classrooms as an example of composure under pressure. Activists shared it as a metaphor for resisting chaos without losing focus. Families texted it to one another late into the night, smiling as they pressed play again and again. The 7th interruption had given way to the 7th line. And that line had become more than just words. It was shorthand, a cultural symbol, a reminder that sometimes the strongest voice in the room is the one that doesn't need to shout. But even as the world replayed and celebrated, the deeper question loomed. What would this moment mean for the battles yet to come? Because if one line could shift the energy of a debate, what else might it signal about the future fight for America's soul? When the applause finally faded and the lights dimmed, what remained wasn't the clash of personalities. And in that lesson lay a larger reflection on America itself. The nation has often struggled with voices shouting over one another, with power trying to drown out principle. Yet time and again, history has shown that dignity endures. The noise fades, but the moral clarity remains. From civil rights leaders who faced jeers with discipline, to everyday citizens who chose patience over provocation, the arc of justice has always been bent, not by volume, but by vision. That night, Obama reminded the country that composure is not passivity, it is power. It is the strength to know that truth does not need to scream to be undeniable. It is the understanding that while arrogance may dominate a moment, dignity commands the memory. And in politics, as in life, it is memory, the imprint left behind, that truly shapes the future. The crescendo of his lesson was not just for his opponent, nor for the millions watching at home. It was for anyone who has ever felt overshadowed by louder voices. For anyone who has ever wondered if calmness is enough. For anyone who has questioned whether dignity can survive in a world that rewards spectacle. The answer, in that single moment, was yes. Because justice, in its purest form, is not about overpowering. It is about outlasting. The crowd will always remember who shouted the loudest, but history will always remember who stood the tallest. And so, as the debate ended, as the 7th line reverberated across the nation, it carried with it a reminder worth holding on to. Real strength isn't in shouting over others. It's in standing tall when the noise is loudest. That was the moral, the legacy, the victory one that no interruption could ever erase. Trump interrupted 6 times. 6 moments of arrogance, bluster, and noise. But on the 7th time, when he lunged in once more, Obama shut him down for good, not with anger, not with volume, but with clarity that echoed louder than any shout ever could. That's the moment we'll remember. Not the interruptions, not the chaos, but the stillness that broke it. Because in the end, This story was never just about a debate stage. It was about a universal truth. Dignity will always outlast arrogance. Patience will always silence noise. And leadership, real leadership, is measured not by how often you interrupt, but by how deeply your words resonate when the world is listening. That is why the seventh line mattered. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a reflection of what we need more of in our country. Calm in the storm, strength without cruelty, courage without shouting. It was a reminder that the loudest voice is not always the strongest, and that silence, wielded with purpose, can be the most powerful sound of all. If you believe in that lesson, if you felt that surge of pride watching dignity triumph over disruption, then you're part of this moment too. Share this story, carry it forward. Let it remind people that arrogance will always collapse under its own weight, but truth, spoken calmly and clearly, will stand. And if you want more stories like this, more moments where justice, patience, and strength cut through the noise, subscribe to this channel. Join a community that believes in amplifying not just headlines, but values. Because Trump may have tried to interrupt 6 times, but the 7th time, America witnessed what real strength looks like. And that's a truth worth spreading.